Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here with all of you. Thank you for coming. And uh, I'm going to show you today some recent works on paper that's not just representing what's been going on in the studio, but I'm using the studio to understand what's been going on for me, and especially in terms of what's been going on in the world. So I'll be talking about all of that as we go forward. First, I want to orient you into my a main source of inspiration, which is the work of Agnes Martin, both on the left, small drawings of 12 by 12 inches that refer to grids, obviously, but I see them as also referring to spaces of typography and matrices within which we can make sense of things. She also made large paintings of grids, 6 by 6 feet. And on the right is a 5 by 5 foot painting that she made later in life. And I'm also really drawn to this way of creating a sort of diaphanous space and luminosity of color. So you'll see both of these kinds of themes showing up in my work. And after she died, I actually created a project of tracing the forms of the newspaper obituaries and magazines from around the world. So you'll see that in this project, what I was making was tracing the forms of writing using the grids of the newspaper layout, but also these fields, rectangular fields, creating a kind of pulsation of space. And in the bottom right is, I've cut out the field where her photo appeared to create a different spatial orientation to mark her absence. So these themes of writing, grids or structures, and also something about space will show up in all of the work. But I tend to make things a little bit less regular than Agnes you've already seen. And here is what I started making when the pandemic really hit and my mind was full. I started just writing to try to work out what was happening in my mind. And using that writing as the template for, again, tracing the forms of writing, but now in a different way. And I felt like I was creating forms that were in dialogue with each other. So I just experimented with making them in a bunch of different ways. But then I realized it wasn't just that I was making these to work out what I was thinking about, it's that they were expressing how I thought about the coronavirus altogether. And that is, not only there was a sense of social distancing when I went for walks on the trail near my house, but that these dots were a sort of representation of how I see the virus acting. And that is, when I saw people on the trail, I felt like I was imagining this cloud of microbes around them, like pig pen. And I didn't know, whether they were contagious or not. But then I further reflected that the virus itself, the microbe, it really actually is always around us and even inside our bodies, but may or may not make a difference in terms of it may or may not cause a problem. We might inhale the aerosol and exhale it and nothing happens, just as we may or may not see these colors differentiating themselves in a color blindness test. So once I realized that, the project became more formal and I started to work it through in different ways and use different media and be deliberate about the colors being sort of pink, like calamine lotion on lesions or something. But once that became a little bit determined, it became less interesting. So a little dead end into being obsessed with the virus. So I started playing around with the color and creating space with the color choice, a little bit more electricity and pulsation. And finally, also I ended up liking the forms better, the weirder they got. But finally changing the palette altogether to make it a bit more cheerful, like a meadow with flowers, because I felt like I was getting bogged down in thinking about the virus and wanted to use these drawings to crowbar myself out of that way of thinking. But once I did that, I felt like the project had resolved itself and I put it aside, and I became much more interested in joy altogether. I also just wanted another project and had a bunch of watercolors around, so I painted watercolor paper with these tones of yellow that were reminded me of microtones in music, that they could be just slightly different and create a sort of visual electricity with their juxtaposition. And thinking a lot about how the feeling of this field was, I've been calling these bright fields because they just really perk me up. And I did about a dozen or so of these and felt like I had, again, done enough of them and put them aside, learned what I wanted to learn from them. And then this happened. And I realized that the letters of Black Lives Matter on the streets of DC were in the same color palette as what I had used for this project. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, because I was hearing people like David Diggs and others talk about not only the protests being an outlet for Black rage, but also being an opportunity to lift up Black joy. And so I thought maybe this color was not just talking about how we could, not just offering a message for how we could redirect the vision of the nation in terms of how stop signs traffic signs help redirect us, but actually it's using the very structure of the road itself to redirect how the nation is moving. So I started to think back on my own project as a kind of alternative flag, maybe alternative American flag, really emphasizing joy in some way. And that was intriguing, but I also felt a bit uncomfortable. I didn't want to be sort of appropriating the entire Black Lives Matter movement for my mini tiny collages. These are only a couple inches in each direction. So I started to think about what other imagery I could imagine for a vision that I could inhabit, still focusing somehow on joy, but now also about space and the space within which joy emerges. And so these are much larger watercolors, 30 inches by 22 pieces of paper. The images are 18 by 18. And there are 3 layers of watercolor paint on these grids, which is why they're all so different. Each cell is so different. But the space felt a little too regular, a little too much like Agnes Martin for my own comfort. So I started to stretch at the cells. And also this is reflecting on some research I've been doing into Cubist space and things that Picasso was doing before Cubism even. And it's a little hard to see. So here's a detail of one of the cells where I'm stretching at the grid. And this was interesting to me. It feels like it combines all of the things that I talked about at the beginning, but it's a little bit illegible. So I started making these drawings, which are actually my favorites at the moment. And I think they require a bit more of the viewer to make sense of them, which I think actually fits for where we are nationally. There's so much happening all the time that I feel like it's a lot to make sense of. And I also like these because they relate to the work I was doing before the pandemic struck. This is a webpage from a show I had in DC called Out of Joint, which these small drawings were also taking the cells of the grid and pulling at them and twisting at them. And it also related to the general disorientation that I've felt over the last couple of years. But now using a visual language where even the lines are see-through. So them being all in watercolor means that the space is permeating even the structures that I'm using to create the space. This is a detail of one of the drawings. So I think that creates a 10-minute presentation.
Hi, Karen. This is Anisha from Niwot, Colorado, and
Wow.
I really love your work. It's so intriguing, and I've got two questions. I like your monochromatic expressions, tonal expressions, and are you familiar with the work of Annie and Joseph Albers?
Sure.
Yeah, because that's what they remind me of. They have that kind of there's just a pull to them that has that same exquisite expression like their work. The other is, are you familiar with the game Go?
I know of it, but I've never played.
Because that's what your work, the actual doing of your pieces, the first ones, especially on a grid, remind me of, because the game is always shifting and changing, so those shapes are always shifting and changing. But it is how you place pieces on that intersection space, not in the box.
Mm.
So, and then you connected and it felt just like a game of Go. So it was very fun. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I love the idea that the work actually feels like a game because I like the element of play that comes into that.
Sharon Brandt,
Oh,
and
hello.
I'm living in Beacon, New York, and I'm so glad that I got to see you and your work on the screen. I love all of your work. I think it's all fabulous, and I agree with you. Those last blue ones are just wonderful. They're incredible. I
Thank
would just love to see more and see big ones and a lot of them, and I can't wait to see more of them, really.
you. I actually feel like the first two bodies of work I showed were sort of like coughing and clearing my throat on the way to getting to the others.
Uh-huh.
But they're my way of working through the virus and the protests, you know, what's happening, and trying to, not that I'm leaving either one of those subjects behind, but that you know, during those times, I actually found it hard to concentrate on my usual whatever. And
Well, they're playful. They're so playful.
yeah, the last ones feel like,
The early ones are so playful. I like that quality.
thank you.
Karen, it's Steve Thompson from Philadelphia, PA,
Wow.
and
Hi.
so lovely to be able to attend some of this. I appreciated seeing your outer and inner work simultaneously, and my favorite line was, "And then this happened." So thank you.
It's Chris Hebert. I'm so glad to see your work and to see you here. I am just so so encouraged and taken by the fact that you can look at the world through the forms that you have been working with for so long, and make it make it wrap around what's happening right now. I love the blue pieces at the end, and there's something about that structure and the individual squares that are all sort of like, you know, they're all sort of moving around, but they can hang on to each other at the corners, that I find very moving.
Thanks very much.